in the pursuit of truth and common sense in an unbelievable world. You're listening to the Right Mind podcast with your host, Todd Schowalter.
Hello, everybody. I'm Todd Schowalter, and welcome again to Right Mind. Today, I have with me Dr. Karla Manning. She's with a group called the Equity Leadership Group, and we're going to talk. We're going to revisit, rather, a subject we talked about earlier, and that's critical race theory. How you doing today, Karla?
I'm well. Thanks, Todd. Hi, everybody. Good day to everyone.
Well, I appreciate you joining me. You know, it's all over the news now. There's a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on it. What's your take on the whole critical race theory?
Well, to be honest, I'm a person that I am a proponent of advocating and talking about racial issues, racism, and anti-racism in our society. I acknowledge that this is a contentious topic right now, even polarizing, where people are on different sides of the fence, even contentious, where people are confrontational, aggressive, even. I'm against all of that. I'm a person that believes that even though in this country we are still struggling for racial justice and racial equality, however, I believe in the power of conversations. I believe in the power of dialoguing. So I hate to say it like this, but I think some of our legislators are a bit misguided to say that we should not have these conversations. I think in having the conversations openly and honestly can help us as a country. So where our legislators are trying to ban even dialoguing about these topics, I think is a misguided policy.
Okay, I think one of the issues that people are having right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just reading the narrative along with everybody else. There seems to be this idea that by promoting this and teaching critical race theory, it's being done at the expense of another race. In this situation, white children. Now, I don't know if that's totally true or not. Can you explain that? Is that what it is, or is that totally off base?
It's hard to say it, and just as clear as that. Well, first, Todd, I didn't even introduce myself to everyone. So let me at least introduce myself.
Well, go ahead, Karla. Come on down and tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Karla Manning. A little bit about me. I'm an educator at heart. I'm a former Chicago Public Schools teacher. I have a PhD in education from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm also a university lecturer in New York City, and I am also a school diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. I'm CEO of the Equity Leadership Group. And with the Equity Leadership Group, we provide trainings, curriculum development services, and coaching services to K-12 administrators and educators who are serious about this work of promoting equity and inclusion. And so conversations of race, racism, and anti-racism are certainly a part of the work that I do. So I am a bit biased here.
No, that's okay.
Sure. But I'm also comfortable with having conversations with folks who may not see things the way I see it, and I'm okay with that as well.
Well, and that's just it. What I'm trying to do, again, I don't take sides in this issue in any way. I like to hear, like you said, I like to talk about it. I like to hear you explain it, because I think we're getting these narratives from different sources. That you mentioned the word biased. I think they're doing it with their own agenda, and I don't think we're getting a fair shake on it. So, from your standpoint, I've had a guest on my show, I guess about 2 or 3 earlier, that she was African American female, and she was against critical race theory. So this is, I'm interested to see your point on why we should, in fact, have it.
Absolutely.
And again, I go back again. I pick up from where I left off.
Sure.
Are we doing this at the expense, though, of another race?
Yeah, so I don't want to say it's at the expense of another race being the white race. I don't know if I want to look at it that way, and I don't know if I see it that way. But I'm going to be honest, I think white people do have a responsibility to acknowledge the wrongdoings that have been done against people of color in the name of white racism. And white racism and just whiteness as a whole are two different things.
Well, explain that.
Yeah, because, well, Racism, first of all, I believe that racism and race is a social construct, meaning that biologically, I don't know how we can determine our racial categories. Meaning that if we open us up as human beings, how do we know that a person is Caucasian, African American, Latino? So I'm a person that believes that race has been socially constructed, meaning that how can we biologically determine our racial categories? I don't know if we can determine that. Gender, for example, is biological. There's no social construction with that. But race has been socially constructed to essentially, the way I look at it, to divide the human race on the basis of capitalism and economics. Um, the categories of white, Black, African American have not always been in existence. People have defined themselves and have positioned themselves in multiple ways throughout history. These categories of white, Black, Latino did not come into our existence probably until like around the 16 or 1700s. So that's why I say it's socially constructed. By definition, I don't know if I would automatically say that just by default, a person being white automatically equates that person to being racist. I don't believe that. However, I will say that the majority of white people, if not all white people in America, by definition of being white, have benefited from white privilege. I think I can say that. I don't know if I can necessarily equate whiteness to racism. So that's why I say just by a white person being white doesn't necessarily mean that that person is racist. However, I will say that by all of us as Americans, that we have been socialized into accepting different norms that come with racism. I don't know if I can automatically determine, that one particular group is racist or not. Just by the color of their skin. I think that racism is also a process of ideals, beliefs, and values that folks have accepted over time that places one racial group over another in terms of hierarchical systems.
Well, I mean,
Racism. Oh,
go
yeah.
ahead. I was just saying, okay, because you were talking about, you hit on something that's also a pretty hot topic right now,
Yeah.
and that's white privilege.
Yeah.
That's one thing I personally don't understand. I wonder if we're looking at more of a socioeconomic situation. Because, for example, I know a lot, well, not a lot, but I know several. I mean, of white individuals that aren't very well off to do, and they've had a lot of hardships, and it's based on their background, where a variety of socioeconomic situations.
Yeah.
I also know a lot of in fact, I work with several very extremely successful African American people. Okay, so and it seems to me that a lot of it has to do with opportunities, things that you've gotten, where you've grown up, who you may be. And I think, don't you think that's an awfully big label just to say that, well, because you're white, you had privilege?
It is a big label, but I mean, to be honest, that's also a reality, Todd. I mean, I can't deny that. Um, Now you're bringing up another topic as well, which is that of class and socioeconomics. Race and economics almost go hand in hand in this country. Um, and see, the other things too that you're bringing up, like, okay, I have, wealthy African American friends, but see, here's the hypocrisy with racism. No matter how much wealth an African American person may have or how many degrees they have, that doesn't stop a police officer from assuming that this person is a quote unquote, thug or gangster and shooting them and killing them because of some racial biases that they may have against Black people. You see what I'm saying? So that exceptionalism on behalf of African Americans, folks who are wealthy and rich, that still doesn't stop a person from having racial biases against them, regardless of their socioeconomic status as wealthy African Americans. That still doesn't stop racism from affecting them in a deleterious way.
No, certainly some terrible things happen, and that's really unfortunate. And you do have, I mean, I'm not going to deny it. I mean, there are some terrible people out there that I'm sure are very racist, and that's wrong. On the other hand, you have some people that, oh, not some, I said the majority of people I know, really are not racist at all. In fact, I personally work and associate and am friends with a variety of people, of different genders, different races, things like that. So I think it's how I was brought up. I think it was, some of the situations I was exposed to at an early age. It just seems to me, if we come back to the critical race theory that is now being taught in the schools, or not being taught, but is proposed to be taught. My concern is, are we, and I'm not saying, I mean, because again, I'm going to go back, there were some terrible things that happened in the past. That's true. Okay. I mean, for example, Pearl Harbor was bad too, but we don't, look at, we don't treat the Japanese that way. I mean, so I'm not saying, and the slavery was terrible. Okay. So I'm not, there were a lot of bad things, but at this stage, I'm not saying that we deny it didn't exist. It did exist. I'm fine with teaching it, but are we, with critical race theory, and correct me if I'm wrong, are we actually fighting racism with more racism?
Okay, I'm going to say no on that. Definitely no. First of all, critical race theory was never taught in public schools to begin with. Okay.
Okay.
So even for legislators to think that critical race theory has been taught, there's little evidence that shows that. That's first and foremost. Let me also offer and expand this this concept of critical race theory to offer a larger expanded definition here.
Okay.
Critical race theory is also one form of critical social theory. Any form of critical social theory is looking at and critiquing inequalities in society through a particular lens. So critical race theory is just one form of critical social theory. Critical social theory includes feminist theory, critical race theory, Marxist theory, LGBTQ theory. These are all different identities, but these are all different theoretical disciplines that analyze inequalities in society through that particular lens. So even when we have questions about, well, critical race theory, why don't we ask questions about critical feminist theory or LGBTQ theory? Sometimes I wonder, why is critical race theory under attack? The reason why I believe that critical race theory is under attack is because I think America at large, society at large, does not want to reconcile, deal with, acknowledge, or address, confront, or remedy any of the wrongdoings that have been done in the name of racism, particularly against African Americans and indigenous folks in this country. Just simply talking about race and how racism has impacted people of color is not necessarily ending it. It is a step to it, and it is a necessary step. But in my opinion, there's no such thing as confronting racism with racism. I just did a podcast on this myself. I have a podcast called the Equity Experience Podcast. And actually, I just released the episode this morning. And the title of it is, Can People of Color Be Racist? And my answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not.
They can? Why is that?
Cannot. The question that I raised is, can people of color be racist? And my answer is no. No, we cannot. So to address your point, are we fighting critical race theory with racism? No, we're not. Critiquing how race has affected people of color in this country is not racist.
No, and I'm not, no, and that's fine. I mean, the theories and theoretically, I mean, there are a lot of things that can be studied, and they are being studied. Actually, one of the things that was pointed out, I mean, this is, a topic, typically taught in graduate level studies, even law school, things like that. And there's, that's fine. I mean, there's a place for that, and it is definitely worth exploring. The situation I think that we're dealing now on a more mass public level is that, you're looking at this being brought into elementary education, where, we're I don't want to use indoctrinating, because that's a very, that's a little deep. But if we're bringing these theories, and you talked about, gender, race theory, there's all kinds of things. Yeah. But when we're talking about kids, okay, in their very, formative years, why? I mean, I'm going to go back to my situation. When I was, kindergarten through 5th grade, I lived in a very, I was in a very diverse neighborhood. My best friend was African American. I mean, we never thought about this kind of stuff. We got along. I mean, we just, one guy was one guy, the other guy was another. We didn't think about it. And I think, what if you bring this into the school, and are you kind of creating a problem? If we're already getting along, I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do this or study this at a more advanced level, but when we start, bringing this onto the primary level, are we creating an issue that, these kids didn't have in the first place?
Well, I don't think it's creating an issue, Todd. This is a very multi-layered concept and topic that you're bringing up. First, I think that we have to think about instructional methods. So if a school or a teacher is serious about bringing this into the elementary or primary grades, we do have to think about how this is taught, because I am a person that believes that children have to learn things developmentally and age appropriate. So on one hand, it depends on how this topic of race and racism is taught. And it also depends on what it is that the teacher is trying to teach about racism and anti-racism. So I don't think that these topics should just be randomly taught without any sort of purpose or context or larger goals. There has to be some direction and intention here.
And what do you think that direction should be? If you were to, if say you were
Well,
to,
well, I'm a person for racial equity. So I was going to say, Todd, you also bring up some interesting points, and you say, hey, you know, I had some childhood friends and we all got along. But that's fine, that's your context, but that's not also addressing the fact of like systemic racism that is also operating. And so we can also think about how racism is played out in terms of outcomes and disparities in terms of lifestyle. Race and racism is not just about Black and white people getting along and, oh, I have Black friends and I have white friends.
Mhm.
That's more of an individual choice, but that's not the whole concept of racism systemically. See, we're also talking about employment and unemployment. We're talking about where people of color live. We're talking about retirement. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about the lifestyles that people have as a result of choices that they have made, and also as a result of opportunities that they may have been given and may not have been given because of their race. So these are very layered questions, Todd, and it's deeper than people of color having friends of the race of the opposite race. It's deeper than that. It's also about outcomes that Blacks and whites and people of color achieve and don't achieve, largely because of their skin color.
no, you know, I know you keep using the word deeper, deeper,
Yeah.
and it's a deep subject, you know. And when I'm in kindergarten, first, second grade, I'm still learning how to add 2 + 2, what's like a square and what's a circle, and you know, I've got some basic things as a kid I'm trying to learn, and you know, I agree this is a deep issue that you know shouldn't be swept under the rug.
So
But is it really a place for like the you know the little kids?
well, it is, but we also have to keep in mind little kids are also understanding messages about racial identity, but their messages shouldn't necessarily be negative messages. Let me give you an example, Todd. When I was in graduate school, I used to work at Cracker Barrel. I don't know if you all are familiar with the
Oh
restaurant
yeah,
Cracker
Cracker
Barrel.
Barrel. They got the
Yeah,
swing out in front. Yeah,
with the front porches, right?
right, right.
So I enjoyed working there. I was a cashier. And so as you know, I was checking out a customer, and I remember this young boy. Now this was a white family, a white mother and a white child. And he had to be about 4 or 5 years old. And he looked at me and he said, "Excuse me, are you Black?" And I said, yeah. I said
Yeah, yeah,
the same way you're white. I said, yeah, but I am, you know. Now I didn't have a problem with that. What
sure.
I had a problem with is how his mother reacted. And his mother was so ashamed. She says, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that he asked you that. Oh, I'm so embarrassed." I said, "Ma'am, what do you have to be embarrassed about? He didn't do anything wrong." And she says, "Oh, well, he asked you if you were Black. You know, oh my gosh, I'm just so embarrassed." I said, "But he didn't do anything wrong. That's how I identify myself. All he's doing is making an observation. He's not doing anything wrong. He didn't
And
say anything wrong."
no, and that's an excellent point because you said
Yeah,
right there. I mean, if you have a small child, the innocence of a small child,
right.
where he's just in kids, you know, out of the mouths of babes, as they say, you know,
Mhm.
there was nothing wrong or malice
Right.
about that. That was
Right.
just an
But
observation by a small kid. And the thing
correct.
is, why can't it stay that way?
But see, but
Why,
here's the thing. But he made the observation. So
right?
we also have to understand how even if we just look at white and Black, how are Black people perceived, represented, portrayed on TV, in the media, in society? So yes, he's making an observation, but we also have to put this in context. He's also understanding and thinking about the fact that there is a person that's different from him because of the color of his skin.
Mhm.
So the fact that he's making that observation, I would say then we have to continue to teach about how we understand ourselves as racial human beings, but within a positive, affirming way.
Sure, and I totally agree. And I think, you know,
And
going back,
that's my approach, Todd. So when we're
okay.
talking about teaching critical race theory in schools, that's how I advocate for the teaching of race theory in schools. I don't advocate for a teaching of race theory in a way that is contentional or divisive, not at the elementary level. Now, I do advocate to have deeper conversations that can be, I don't want to say confrontational, but that can be debated in middle school or high school. I think at those levels, middle school or high school, those are some more appropriate spaces to have deeper conversations about race. But for elementary school, K-5 with the babies, the way that race should be taught in terms of curriculum and teachers should be in a way that is culturally affirming, so that K-5 children understand and respect different racial human beings in a different way, but in a respectable way. To understand, yes, my friend Todd is white. Yes, my friend Karla is Black, but let's understand the similarities, accept and embrace that, as opposed to teaching some hardcore issues that may create different ways of thinking.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
think, and again, I think everybody, and again, I keep going back to earlier shows. I think the majority of the people think, thank God, are, everybody wants to get along. I don't think we want, I mean, a lot of this so-called racism that you see on television, in the media and things like that, it's almost as if they want this divide. And I've said it before, by creating this divide, which they're doing a very good job of, you in turn gain control. Now, if we all get along, and we're best friends, and we're not even looking at this as an issue anymore, and we're not letting the talking mouthpieces and the politicians and the things like that try to divide us and get along, I think that would be pretty easily done, to be quite honest with you. It's almost as if, it's almost as if this is a control issue, where they're coming in, they're trying to divide us. They're showing instances on in the media that are just, they're biased and wrong. And I think what the way, at least the way it's being presented to the masses right now about what this critical race theory and how it's actually going to be presented, it's being presented in a divisive manner. It's not, I mean, I agree that we should all get along. I agree that everybody, I think, does want to get along. But when it's presented in such a way that, we're going to do this at the expense of somebody else, and I know you say that's not what the case is, but that's how it's being portrayed. I mean, go ahead.
It is. I mean, some of this is also, we also have to understand, Todd, and I don't mean to go off on a tangent or to take a left hook, but I'm going to be honest, for people of color, particularly for African Americans, there's always going to be racial tension in this country until America as a society, and particularly as the federal government, recognizes and takes responsibility for slavery. That has not happened yet. And so for many African Americans and Black people in this country, that's always going to be a point of tension, particularly when you look at the fact that other groups of people in this country, racial and historic cultural groups, have received reparations, have received a formal apology from the government. African Americans, Todd, are the only group of racial groups of people in America that have not received a formal apology from the government and have not received reparations.
Well, don't you think that a lot of measures are being taken? And
No, Todd. We just have to say that. I'm just looking at the issue of reparations. So I'm saying,
is there like a fixed amount of money that?
Well, I don't know, but I don't now, in terms of the calculation of what that amount would be, I have no idea. I mean, we're probably talking about trillions of dollars. But when I think about the fact that the Japanese have received a formal apology and reparations from the government, the Chinese have, the Jews have, as well as indigenous people. African Americans are the only group of people who have been oppressed by America, but who have not received economic reparations or a formal apology for slavery, for the transatlantic slave trade and for slavery. The only group of people.
Okay, and again, I mean, I'm just.
There's no but though, Todd. I mean, there are other ways to look at that, but I'm just saying, for many people of color, for many African Americans and descendants of people who were enslaved until that point has been acknowledged and addressed by the federal government. I'm just speaking for me on an individual level, but I'm sure other African Americans may be able to agree that that will be a point of tension.
Yeah, well, here's my question then. I mean, just, observationally, I mean, I think a lot of measures, I don't think that people deny it. I think there are a lot of apologies, a lot of stuff. I mean, you mentioned, the Japanese and things like that. Every race, to some extent, you have the Indians, you have everybody. There's been oppression, okay? There have been things. My question is this, okay? Certain things did happen, and I think they have been acknowledged. And I think as a whole, society is trying to, do what they can to make up for that. I mean, we acknowledge, African Americans much more than we ever did. We respect them, we honor them, we celebrate them.
Though, Todd.
But the thing is, why? Let me ask you this: when you say reparations, and again, it comes down to monetary. I'll just be blunt though. Okay, Karla, you weren't a slave, and I wasn't a slaveholder. Why are we paying each other? Why are these kids?
Because our lives are still impacted by what our ancestors have experienced during enslavement. For the majority of the part, many white people in America to this day still economically benefit from the fact that their ancestors have been slaveholders. Universities, Ivy League universities, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, Columbia, these are all universities that have economically as an institution benefited from slavery. I mean,
how do you explain affirmative action? How does that fall into
it? I have mixed feelings about affirmative action. Affirmative action was one policy put in place to address how disparities more like in higher ed, okay? But really affirmative action at the end of the day really benefits white women more than any other group of people. But affirmative action is an example of a policy put in place to address racial disparities in higher ed. I'm sort of neutral on affirmative action. I'm a proponent of it, but I also see the limitations of affirmative action. But in my opinion, affirmative action is not enough.
Well, and again, I mean, you can, I work with a lot of people. I don't even know what color they are, what gender they are. I have a lot of animators and stuff that work for me. If they can do the job and they're talented, I don't care if they're 2 years old,
and that's the way it should be. And that's the way it should be. But we have to acknowledge, Todd, that always doesn't happen. Bank of America, for example, they were, I don't know if they settled, but there was an activist group that sued Bank of America saying that they were stereotyping people and not hiring people based on just their names. They were assuming that based on the names of an application that they were making assumptions about their race. And if they assumed that a person was a person of color just on their name, they did not go through with the application. So Bank of America actually was going through a lawsuit, I don't know if they settled, where they had to acknowledge that they were engaging in racially biased hiring practices.
Yeah, and that does, like I said, I mean, there are some bad apples and some bad experiences. So, it goes both ways, though. I mean,
so it's systemic. See, racism is systemic, Todd. It's not just an individual thing. Racism is also it's a systemic disease that affects pretty much every sector of society. We could break down every sector that has race and racism at the core, even though we may not want to talk about it, even though it may be invisible, and even though it may be hard to see or understand, it is present and it is operating. That's a fact.
Okay, I mean, let me ask you this. I mean, do you think, if you could, do you think everybody should be totally, equal? Just totally, do you believe in full equality?
Of course I do. And the reason I do is not because of a political agenda. It's because of a spiritual agenda, Todd. Now, I'm not trying to preach or anything here, but I'm a Christian. I'm a child of God. All of us are equal under God's eye. And so how can we say that another person should not receive this or should not achieve this or have this just because of their race or gender? None of us have the ability as human beings to determine that about another human being. We don't have that omnipotent power. So to
Right.
answer
And
your
I
question, of course I
totally
believe
agree.
that.
And I
Yeah,
think, we all, and I too, I think we should all be equal. I don't think
yeah,
one race or gender or anything, anybody should be better than the other. My
yeah.
question again, though, coming back to the whole theory of critical race theory, if we all want to be equal, okay, we all agree we all want to be equal. Now we got some kindergartners, we got 5, 6, 7-year-olds, things like that. And we bring them into the classroom. We want them to all get along and be equal. But at the same time, we're teaching them that, well, this one race was very oppressed. You are the oppressor. And by the way, we have to pay them now a lot of money for it. How are we equal when we're doing that in the classroom? Why can't we just get along? Why do we have to throw these?
But unfortunately, Todd, we don't. See,
We don't
just
what?
because we don't get along in this country,
But we
we
should.
are
That's
still.
what kids do. I
I
think
didn't hear you.
kids do. I mean, I think, but that's just it. If we would take it from a fundamental level, going back to your Cracker Barrel experience, the innocence of a child, and I believe the innocence of a child is in the classroom. I mean, like I said, when I grew up, I had my buddies and everything. I mean, variety of. I had Asian friends. I had African American friends. I mean, it was no big deal. I think you've got that innocence of equality at the beginning. I think when we start bringing things and we start teaching racism,
Yeah. Now
and
Yeah.
and this whole thing with the systemic racism, I have no problem. The past, we learn from history. Okay, I agree that we learn from history, and that should always be taught so that it doesn't happen again. But when we come in and we start from the get-go saying, hey,
Now I'm not.
your ancestors oppressed this race, and this race was oppressed, and now we're going to pay you. You're paying them a lot of money from the get-go. I mean, that's not a balancing act there. You've
Yeah, but
already is causing division.
yeah, that narrative is,
Well,
and that
explain
is
one. Okay, well, explain
the narrative, the statements that you just brought up. I can see how that can cause division, but
right.
that's not a narrative that I agree to or that I approve, though. And
Okay,
see,
then
that's what I'm
explain
saying.
how
That
you would do it. Explain how you would do it.
I already explained it. In K-5, the way that we should talk, the way that critical race theory should be taught in K-5 should be racially, culturally affirming, meaning
Okay.
that as people, regardless of our racial background, that we should be taught to embrace and accept who we are and accept ourselves. So
Okay.
part of critical race theory in K-5 is also about teaching, particularly people of color, how they should accept their identity, their racial identity, in a positive, culturally affirming way. The same thing for white people. Understand how to accept who you are as a white person in a culturally and racially affirming way. The statements that you brought up, the narratives about one group of people being racially oppressed and another group of people. Now, in my opinion, Todd, that's the truth. I'm not going to say that we should not teach that. I would say that that should be taught more at the middle school or the high school level. I don't think that those ideas or those concepts or topics should be taught at the K-5 level. So
Well,
yeah.
and again, okay, I agree. It should be, we can identify the history books or whatever. We can say that this happened, but you're keeping it alive, I think, with this whole thing when nobody wants this. Nobody wants
And African Americans then don't want to be racially oppressed. People of color don't want to be racially oppressed. Nobody wants to live in right. Nobody wants to live in a racist society. But for racism to exist, there has to be one group of people who are oppressed and one group of people who are the oppressors.
And
so if we don't want,
it doesn't have to be that way.
Todd, me and you are on the same page.
Right.
Me and you are exactly on the same page.
Yeah.
But how do we address it? How do we get out of it? And most importantly, just because we don't want it, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. So we have to be mindful.
Yeah, we're all. Oh, sorry. Anyway, okay. Well, Karla, I got. Actually, you know what? We're down to our last 2 minutes. You know what I'd like to do? I would like to do this as a two-parter, if we could. Can we wrap this one up? Would you mind coming back and following up in a part 2 with me?
Absolutely, I would love to, Todd, because there is a lot to talk about with this.
There is. There's a heck of a lot to talk.
There's a lot to talk about. Yeah. And I'm going to say this, and I always say this even as a consultant. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant who sees DEI as a way to bring us together as a country. I do not see DEI, nor do I advocate for DEI in a way to be divisive, contentious.
DEI, now what is that?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I use DEI as a way to bring us together as a country, as a way to, as an approach to heal and to reconcile the troubles of the past. I don't see this work of racial equity or diversity, equity, and inclusion as a way to be divisive. I think that in this country, we still have a long ways to go. But we need to address some ugly parts of our history, and to accept responsibility for what has been done and to move forward. But everybody has a part in that, not just white people. Everybody has a part to play in that. Everybody.
No, I agree. I think everybody should get along. I think everybody should be equal. And I think, bringing things into the mix that are going to, possibly jeopardize that. Like I say, if you got something that's working, don't try to fix it. And when you come in with, some of
But
these
to be
things,
honest, in my opinion, I don't think that we've been teaching about this anyway. I don't think that I'm a teacher. I wouldn't say
no, they're
that
not teaching about it yet. But I tell you, we're out of
I
time.
don't think that they will. I don't
do-
think it has been happening either. So
We're going to do something. I've got, we're out of time, and I do want you to come
Sure.
back because we've got plenty more to talk about. But
Absolutely.
for this particular episode, I don't know if you watched the show or not. My last segment, you've got 2 minutes. Actually, we're out of time. So you've got 40 seconds, Karla. You get to change the world. What are you going to do?
Love, promote self-love, promote love. That's one thing that I will use to change this world, to teach us how we can love ourselves on an individual level and then love our neighbors. I believe love is the cure to healing all diseases, all hatred, all animosity is love.
That's great. I agree totally. I mean,
yes.
We should all get along. We should all love each other.
Love.
Brotherly love. We don't, right. And, we don't want
brotherly love.
Brotherly love. That causes the divisiveness.
Well, and sisterly love too.
Sisterly love, whatever. Everybody loves that. Dogs, cats, whatever.
I love it. I love it.
There you go. Well, we're out of time. I do want you to come back because I definitely think this could be a two-parter. So if you would, again, with me right now is Karla Manning, Dr. Karla Manning. Her group is Equity Leadership Group. We'll put that up on the screen, and we will be following up on it because it seems like we just hit the tip of the iceberg on it.
Yeah.
Karla, thank you very much for joining me.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a pleasure to be here.
Well,
thanks, everyone. You all be well, everyone.
Likewise.
Okay.
Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching or listening. This is Todd Schowalter with Right Mind. And remember, if you don't have a right mind, you don't have a mind at all. Till next time. Bye.
This has been the Right Mind Podcast with Todd Schowalter.